Hello, writers. It is the point in your day when you are ready to continue with our writing lessons, where we are looking at making argumentative essays focus on whether zoos harm animals or zoos protect animals. So today you will notice on the screen it says we are going to focus on using quotations to bolster arguments or our evidence. So that word bolster might be a new vocab word for you. Just replace that with the word strengthen. So using quotations to strengthen or enhance our arguments and evidence. So before we get started, this anchor chart is actually on the back of the anchor chart that you put in your writing binder yesterday, behind your anchor chart tab, where we were talking about the different types of evidence, like facts and statistics and quotes and different things like that. So on the back, there is an anchor chart that is going to talk to you about some very simple, predictable questions that you can ask yourself when you are writing. And asking yourself these questions is a way that you can definitely become a more powerful writer. I always say to kids, when you're reading text, you need to read it like a writer. You need to be analyzing how the author organized their story or organized their text, the different components that they included. And then when you're writing, you need to be thinking like a reader. What are the questions that the person reading this is going to wonder? What are the things that they're going to ask? How are they going to interpret different things? So these are some questions or strategies that we can use to just help enhance our writing. We're going to ask ourselves predictable questions. So some different questions that can help you as a writer analyze your evidence or strengthen your thinking. The first one is, why did I include this evidence? Before you even identified what your 3 pieces of evidence were for each of your reasons, we talked about planning that. Ms. Strasser, in her video during your last module, talked about going into those articles that you have printed about zoos or the ones that are linked on Canvas under writing, going into those articles, looking specifically for evidence that is going to support certain reasons. So instead of just reading through those articles and reading through that text and just finding a sentence or a piece of evidence and saying, oh, wow, I think that's interesting, or I think that could be really powerful, I wonder which one of my reasons that would support going in from the opposite side. So saying, okay, I know that one of my reasons that I have for zoos harming animals is that they might force breeding. So they might have animals that they bring them into the zoo, they force them to have a bunch of babies, and that is really harmful to animals. So when I go and look in my articles, I'm looking specifically for evidence that is going to support that reason. So we want to always be asking ourselves, why did I include this evidence? What was I hoping that it would accomplish? We also have questions like, how does this evidence relate back to my claim? So we might hear really cool quotes or see really neat statistics, but if they don't relate back to our claim, we want to make sure that we're not including those. There needs to be a direct correlation between the evidence that we're including and our claim, which is either that zoos protect animals or that zoos harm animals. You can also ask yourself as a writer, what makes this particular quote or statistic so important? Not necessarily interesting or exciting, but what makes the quote or statistic important? Again, relating it back to your claim, thinking about how it supports specific reasons. And the last one is, how is this evidence changing my thinking? When we first started argumentative text, remember on our anchor chart, we put that the goal is to get others to see your point of view or get others to understand your perspective and your thinking. So when we're including evidence, we need to be asking ourselves, how are we hoping this is going to change the reader's thinking? Today in your planner for your argumentative essay, we are going to be working on the portion of our planner that looks like this. Underneath each of your 3 reasons or your 3 body paragraphs, you have this particular image 3 different times. So we know that for each one of our reasons, we have to have 3 pieces of evidence. So not only evidence, but we are going to be sure to plan out and write out how each piece of evidence supports your claim. So I want to show you 2 different examples here. Over on the right, we have an example of some evidence, and it's showing how it supports the claim, but not as well as we would like to do. So here's what this sample 2 says. Riding the world's tallest and fastest roller coaster, Kingda Ka, is a unique experience. According to Mario Martinez, Kingda Ka accelerates to 128 miles per hour in less than 3 seconds, going straight up at a 90-degree angle. I have ridden hundreds of coasters, but none of them were as terrifying as this one. So we have some evidence here, but notice that nowhere in this sample 2 do we hear how that is supporting the claim, or really what the claim even is. So on the flip side of that, let's look at sample 1. Listen for how these 2 are different. They include similar evidence, they include similar quotes, they include similar statistics, but sample 1 is going to show how it supports a claim. Riding the world's tallest and fastest roller coaster, Kingda Ka, is a unique experience. According to author Mario Martinez in his book, Roller Coasters of the World, Kingda Ka accelerates to 128 miles per hour in less than 3 seconds, going straight up at a 90-degree angle. I have ridden hundreds of coasters, he writes, but none of them were as terrifying as this one. This suggests that Kingda Ka stands out among roller coasters as particularly intense. So I see right there at the end how they are tying their evidence to their claim. Their claim must be that Kingda Ka is either superior to other roller coasters, or Kingda Ka can be described as particularly intense when compared to other roller coasters. But we have similar evidence. Okay, we talk about how it is the world's tallest and fastest roller coaster. We talk about the statistic of it being able to accelerate to 128 miles per hour in less than 3 seconds. We talk about how it goes straight up at a 90-degree angle. And we even have the quote included of how Mario Martinez has ridden hundreds of coasters, but none of them were as terrifying as this one. So the difference maker here between these 2 is how the writer connected their evidence back to their claim. They say that at the very end. This suggests, what does all of this evidence mean? What does it tell me as the reader? Well, it suggests that Kingda Ka stands out among roller coasters as particularly intense. So let's look at the idea of zoos and zoos protecting animals or harming animals, and how we can practice this idea of tying that back to our claim or connecting our evidence to our claim. So here we have thinking about the perspective of zoos protect animals. So kind of get yourself into that mindset. We are arguing that zoos protect animals. And this is one piece of evidence that maybe you have found. It says, since 2009, more than 20,000 tadpoles and toadlets have left Potter Park Zoo to return to release sites in Puerto Rico. So instead of just including this in my writing, I want to, for the reader, answer the question of, well, how does that support this claim? We're going to do that work for them in our writing. So if I'm thinking about how zoos protect animals, one way that I might use this piece of evidence to reinforce that idea is to talk about how that's a lot of tadpoles and a lot of toadlets that we can basically attribute to the Potter Park Zoo. Those are tadpoles and toadlets that wouldn't have probably even existed if the Potter Park Zoo hadn't created an environment where they could be born, taken care of them, and then release them back into the wild. So zoos protect animals because they have basically born and raised 20,000 tadpoles and toadlets that have been able to survive because of them. So I made that connection for the reader. Now we can look at another example. This time we're going to kind of get our head into the space of zoos harm animals. That's my perspective in my writing. I am going to be arguing that zoos harm animals. And here is a piece of evidence that I found. A 2015 study published in the Journal of Applied Ecology concluded that unless animals in the wild are protected, captive breeding won't make a difference. So I'm going to talk about how this connects, how I can connect this piece of evidence to the claim that zoos harm animals. Well, I know that zoos harm animals using this piece of evidence because zoos oftentimes will force animals to breed. They will force animals to basically become pregnant, bring more animals into the world. But this statistic proves that there's no point in bringing more animals into the world if they aren't going to be protected once they are in the wild. So they're harming animals because they are bringing more animals into the world and then basically sending them into the wild to just end up dying anyway. So I'm connecting my evidence to my claim. Today, during your independent writing time, you are going to be working on this portion of your planner. You are going to look at each one of your reasons. You are going to look at the 3 pieces of evidence that you found to support each reason and work to write a sentence that connects your evidence to your claim. Just like we practiced on these 2 slides, you're going to look at what is my evidence and how can I explain to the reader how that piece of evidence either proves or supports that zoos harm animals or that zoos protect animals. So use your writing time today efficiently, please. Take advantage of the time that you are given. You need to try and get as many of these evidence supporting your claim pieces of your planner done as you can today.